Beau is Afraid finally came out in UK cinemas, and after watching it, my main takeaway is that Ari Aster might have some very serious issues to work out with his mother. If you recap the plot, it sounds like when you have a weird dream that feels really vivid and visceral and intense when you're in it, but when you try and explain it to someone the next day, you realize it doesn't make any sense. Except Ari Aster wrote it all down and spent $35 million immortalizing it on film. For the first hour or so, I absolutely loved Beau is Afraid. That first hour is the best cinematic portrayal of anxiety I've ever seen. A lot of films and TV shows have been setting out to depict panic attacks realistically, but panic attacks are just the worst part of having anxiety. There's a lot more to it. For the most part, anxiety is the feeling of dread you have around the worst case scenarios you conjure up in your head. And in the first hour of Beau is Afraid, Aster basically imagines, what if we take a debilitatingly anxious character and make all of his worst case scenarios come true? And I was completely into that. I was ready to declare Beau is Afraid to be the greatest anxiety movie ever made, and one of my favorite films of the year so far. And then in the next 2 hours, it kind of lost the plot and the themes were all over the place, and it got to the point where I had no idea what Aster was trying to say with this unwieldy, indulgent, very, very long movie. So I'm gonna go through Beau is Afraid, from the shit-smeared walls to the paint-drinking suicide to the bloodthirsty penis monster, and try to get to the bottom of what the fuck it was all about.
I'm visiting my mother tomorrow. Do you ever wish that she was dead? What?
For starters, Beau is Afraid tackles the theme that has defined Aster's career, grief. Beau has a disturbing phone call early in the film where he learns that his mother is dead after a falling chandelier caved her head in. He has some very complicated feelings about his mother. He loves her, but he also in many ways absolutely hates her. And when you see the extent of her manipulation and emotional abuse, including faking her death by falling chandelier just to fuck with him, you can't really blame him. But Joaquin Phoenix does the heavy lifting with the film's portrayal of grief. He does a typically incredible job of showing Beau's complex cocktail of emotions as he processes his mother's death. But Aster's bloated script doesn't really have anything to say about the complexity of grief. Hereditary and Midsommar both dealt with death in a way that was both nuanced and horrifying, whereas Beau is Afraid mainly uses death to drive the plot forward. The main theme that stems from Beau's relationship with his overbearing mother is sexual repression. When Beau was a little boy, his mom told him that if he ever ejaculated, he'd have a heart attack and die, so he's been terrified of his own sexual desires ever since. And he has to face those fears head on when he goes into the attic to meet his dad and discovers he was fathered by a giant penis monster. Making Beau's father a 10-foot cock with a face on it is maybe the most ludicrously on-the-nose way that Aster could have illustrated Beau's fear of his own sexuality. But it's certainly memorable, so it succeeds in that sense.
You will walk many miles. Dozens will become hundreds. Hundreds will become thousands. Your adventures will continue for years and years.
The most elaborate and expensive sequence in the movie is also the most pointless. When Beau is fleeing through the woods, he comes across a traveling theater, and they invite him to watch their latest production. And then, in the middle of the play, he starts to imagine that the play is about his own life, and it takes him decades into the future as he has 3 sons,
handsome, beautiful, articulate sons who are talented,
gets separated from them by a big flood, and eventually reunites with them. And then, as Beau is hugging his sons who are all grown up and the boys ask about their conception, oddly enough, they realize they couldn't possibly exist because Beau is a virgin. And then, suddenly Beau realizes he's still watching the play and none of that actually happened. The movie takes like half an hour to go off on this tangent that turns out to be completely redundant. The animation and production design in this extended hallucination sequence are really stunning, but it's basically just a pretty distraction from the actual story.
Welcome back.
I hit you with my car.
What?
I know.
I loved all the stuff with Amy Ryan and Nathan Lane when Beau is recovering from a car accident at their house. That whole dynamic could have been the basis for a great little 90-minute dark comedy. But in Beau is Afraid, it's just part 2 of like 5 or 6 parts, and the movie is never that much fun again. Staying with a different dysfunctional family and seeing how they deal with grief and emotional manipulation could have been an interesting way for Beau to confront his own family issues. But Aster doesn't stick with this family long enough to explore that. He just touches on all these thematic parallels before Beau jumps through the window, runs into the woods, and they're never seen again.
We are gathered now to assess the extent
of the subject's guilt.
The big finale is a court case in an arena inside a cave with thousands of spectators all watching video evidence of Beau being a less than perfect son. His mom has a world-class scumbag attorney on her side, while Beau's cheap public defender is thrown skull first onto a rock in the middle of the trial. This whole scene could be interpreted as a gruesome commentary on the unfairness and imbalance of the American justice system. Or it could be interpreted as a really strange, out-of-left-field way to end a movie that lost the plot over an hour ago.
Do you want the truth now?
All in all, despite dropping the focus on anxiety quite early, anxiety is still the subject that Beau is afraid has the most to say about. The chaos that surrounds Beau perfectly visualizes the feeling of being in a constant state of dread, constantly on alert. And it has an important message about the pointlessness of obsessing over worst-case scenarios. Most of the time, when you're anxious about a given situation, you find that you had nothing to worry about and everything turns out fine. And the odd time that something does go wrong, it's usually not the scenario you imagined. It's something even worse than you could have imagined. After spending his whole life abstaining from sex because his mother told him he'd die of a heart attack if he ever came, Beau finally has sex and he manages to miraculously survive the orgasm, and then his partner dies instead, on top of him. And if that wasn't bad enough, he finds out his mum faked her death and she's been watching from the corner of the room the entire time. Honestly, I think dying of a heart attack mid-climax would have been a more favourable outcome.
I'm sure you'll do the right thing, sweetheart.
The more I think about the dream logic of Beau is Afraid, the more I'm convinced most of the film was a dream. The movie starts with Beau having a restless night before he's due to visit his mother. It's possible that everything from that point on is just a gonzo nightmare that Beau is having on the eve of his trip to his mother's house, in which all his fears are manifested in very bizarre ways. His fear of the crime in his city is manifested as a crowd of vandals invading his apartment, locking him out, smearing shit all over his walls and dropping dead in his doorway. His fear of his mother's guilt trip is manifested as a nightmarish one-sided legal trial. His fear of his own sexuality is manifested as a giant penis monster living in the attic.
Respect the cock.
So that's my reading of Beau is Afraid. The whole thing was a dream. Otherwise, it doesn't make any fucking sense. I'd recommend checking out Beau is Afraid if you're sick of Hollywood convention and you like dark, weird, experimental storytelling, because it sort of has to be seen to be believed. But if you're more of a fan of mainstream entertainment, then stay as far away from this movie as possible.
It's a complicated film.
It really isn't.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe and click on the little bell. And also seize the day and call your mom and be kind to yourself.